Yeah. And now we're live on Facebook. That's great. Hi, everybody on Facebook. I'm Stesha with the library. We're going to get started in just 1 second. All right, panel, we're all ready? I lost Tom, though. Where'd Tom go? There you are. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit start, and we're going to get started. Good evening. Hi there, everybody. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. These are the traditional, unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past and present and thank them for their stewardship of this land. Welcome to the launch of We Hereby Refuse, presented in partnership with Densho, the Wing Luke Museum, and Elliott Bay Book Company. We're grateful to our author series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, and the Seattle Times for generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I have a couple quick announcements before we get started. I wanted to let you know that you can order copies of We Hereby Refuse from our friends over at Elliott Bay Book Company. The store is open for limited browsing, curbside pickup, and delivery, and you can order the book at their website, elliottbaybook.com, and we'll also pop a link to that website in the chat. I also wanted to let folks know that we have closed captioning available tonight. To access the closed captioning, you just click on the closed caption icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And after tonight's conversation, we'll have time for questions from you. You can ask your questions at any time by writing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now I'm delighted to welcome Diane Sugimura, who's on the board of the Wing Luke Museum, and Diane will introduce tonight's program. Hi, Diane.
Hi, thank you very much. I really appreciate being here to represent the Wing and the Board of Trustees. The Wing Museum has been located in Seattle's Chinatown International District for more than 50 years now, and it's the only Pan-Asian Pacific American museum in the country. Consistent with the legacy of Wing Luke, the mission of the museum is to connect everyone to the dynamic history, cultures, and art of the Asian Pacific Americans through vivid storytelling and inspiring experiences to advance racial and social equity. We Hereby Refuse is a powerful example of that vivid storytelling. The Wing had the initial vision for this project and worked with writers and artists to develop this graphic novel, and graphic it is. Cassie Chin, the Deputy Executive Director, led this project for the Wing. It was produced in partnership with the Chin Music Press and supported by a grant from the National Park Service's Japanese American Confinement Sites program. This is the second in a series of 3 graphic novels. This story is tragic, but it's one that must be told. As if the incarceration of Japanese Americans was not enough, the challenges and sacrifices that the resistors faced is even more heartbreaking. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Tom Ikeda, who is the founding executive director of Densho. For 25 years, Densho and Tom have been fiercely and tirelessly dedicated to recording, preserving, and sharing the stories of the people who experienced the trauma of incarceration during World War II. I could spend a lot of time talking about Tom and his awards and achievements, but I think it's best to turn the program over to him now because he tells the story best. Tom?
Great. Thank you so much, Diane. And I am so excited about this program. And so, Frank, Tamiko, and Ross, go ahead and unmute yourselves because, what I want to do, and Frank and I do this quite a bit, is I just want to make this a conversation. I mean, you're great people. You have a great book. I'm really excited about the book and the response it's getting. And so let me start with this congratulations. I mean, we're all on social media. Great buzz on social media. You're getting great coverage. I'm getting lots of emails. I just want to show kind of on the screen, just for some people in terms of, here it is. just the type of coverage, the Seattle Times, which is our local newspaper, they listed you guys as one of the great reads this summer, as well as this great, article, how the Washingtonians, wrote this, Hereby Refused book. So again, congratulations. And so in terms of the conversation, I know the three of you and, Matt Sasaki put a ton of work into this book. And oftentimes, we forget that. And I want the three of you just to take a moment to think about, a surprise or a delight that you had since the book has been launched. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to one by one introduce you and then ask you, what delight or surprise you have. So I'm going to start with Tomiko first. And, Tomiko, I know you as, really as an, Asian American scholar and writer who lives in Tacoma. Your training is in community journalism, literature, and American ethnic studies. You have not only a master's, but you have a PhD from the University of Washington, which has really prepared you to research, document, and tell the stories of people of color. More information about you can be found at tomikonimura.net. But Tomiko, the first question for you to get us started is, what's a story, what's a delight that you've had since the book has come out?
Oh, there have been so many, but one of my very favorite moments was a Facebook post from my freshman year high school English teacher. After I graduated, she became the school librarian, and she just retired this year. And she sent me a post. It was a picture of the book on the library shelf, and said, "This is one of the last things I got to do before I retired, was to put your book into the catalog and prepare it for next year's readers."
Tomiko, I love this story. I saw that Facebook post, and it just warmed my heart to think of one, how much teachers and mentors mean to us, but then for them to see that and post that was wonderful.
It was really lovely.
So next, let me go to Ross. And Ross, you're a cartoonist and animator who lives in Seattle. You're currently working on a graphic novel about your parents and their coming of age during World War II. Your work is at rossishikawa.com. But the other thing I want to mention, Ross, and we talked about this last week, is our sons know each other through the sport of ultimate frisbee, and which Seattle is a pretty big deal. But already I feel a little more connected with you because of that. But same question, Ross. What delight or surprise have you had since the book's been out?
Well, I mean, in general, just the response has just been amazing to me, and I'm getting in touch with friends that I hadn't been in touch with for a long time who've gotten the book and read it. But the other weekend I went to Bainbridge Island just with my sister and brother-in-law, and we were just going there to the Great Art Museum there. And we decided to stop over at Eagle Harbor Books and just to see if they had the book. And so my sister asked if they had it, and so they said yes. It's selling really well. We think we have one copy left, and so they took us over and showed it to us, and it looked great. And then my brother-in-law said, and he's the illustrator for the cover, and they got all excited, and they said, "Oh, can you autograph it? Can you?" And it was. I felt like a rock star for a few minutes, so it was really fun.
Well, soak it all in, because you deserve it. And I think there's something special about actually going into a retail outlet and seeing your work there, and actually knowing people are buying it.
And also, I mean, just Bainbridge Island is just the history on Bainbridge Island is just so this really spoke to a lot of people there, I think. So
great. Okay, so let's go to the third one. Frank, and Frank, you wrote and directed the PBS film Conscience and the Constitution, which was about the largest organized resistance to the World War II Japanese American incarceration. You also won an American Book Award for John Okada, the life and rediscovered work of the author of No No Boy. And you also are co-editing a new anthology of incarceration literature for Penguin Classics. Your blog or your website is at resistors.com. So Frank, same question. What delight or surprise have you had since the book's been out?
I sent the copy to novelist Viet Thanh Nguyen. We share an interest in John Okada. And he sent me back this picture of his son, Ellison, 7-year-old Ellison. He says, Ellison immediately picked up the book and started reading with no encouragement from me. And we wondered if the book would reach young readers as young as 7 years old, and evidently it does. I've been surprised how quickly the book has found its audience, thank goodness, and has flown off the shelves, as Ross suggested, so that our first printing of 3,000 is sold out. And a second printing, I can now announce, is underway, a second printing of 3,000. So copies may be hard to find right now. And I want to announce that more copies should be landing shortly after the 4th of July holiday. So Chin Music Press asks for your patience. All orders will be fulfilled.
Great. So thanks for Frank for that news, which doesn't surprise me. I think frankly, I think we all, well, this is one I get into, because I think when people learn more about the three of you, and we talk a little bit about Matt also, they'll understand why this book has been so successful. And so, Frank, I'm going to start about you, because we've known each other for a long time. I have followed your career for over 2 decades. I mean, your film Conscious in the Constitution, really set a high bar in terms of documenting and talking about resistance. And I sort of want the audience to know that this book is special in the sense of how much sort of depth and knowledge is involved. Not only did you do the Conscious in the Constitution, but your work on John Okada and really understanding the resistors from a fiction standpoint also. And so, the question, before I get there, I just want to show, which I enjoyed, because, when I think of, when I read the book, there were, all these little surprises in there. And, this is just a panel that, Ross drew, but, it's on the lower part of it is a picture drawn of the Heart Mountain draft resistors, which was, a focus of Conscious in the Constitution. And you linked it to, one of the characters in We Hereby Refuse. In this case, it's Gene Akutsu, the brother of Jim Akutsu. And then another piece, that you kind of bring your background in. Whoops, I think I got my sequence. Let me go to this one. Yeah, this one where we have Jim Akutsu in a restaurant.
At Tai Tung Cafe.
Tai Tung Cafe, which I was there just last week, and he's meeting John Okada, the author of the book that you wrote. But the question, I have for you, Frank, is because of you've been in this arena for a long time. It's been 21 years since the premiere of Conscious in the Constitution, and I'm just curious how your thinking has expanded about resistance of Japanese Americans during World War II. You focused on the draft resistors, but
right.
You're now diving into more stuff. Talk about that, how it's expanded.
Well, I talked to Barbara Takei of the Tudor Lake Committee, and I said it was actually a cop-out for me to do the Fair Play Committee, because these were young men who answered yes and yes to the government's infamous loyalty questionnaire. And so the harder challenge, we decided, was that just as I had reframed the story of the Fair Play Committee and draft resistors and brought them into the center of the Japanese American polite conversation, which it hadn't been before 20 years ago, the final frontier was kind of reframing the story of Tule Lake, America's worst concentration camp, the scene of, the segregation, the renunciation and deportation of many incarcerees. So taking on that challenge was the real one of the big accomplishments of this book. One of the other things was, in terms of discovering new resistance, we've learned more about the role of women in camp, in particular the protest in Minidoka of the Mother Society of Minidoka, immigrant women who organized a letter writing campaign to demand full citizenship rights for their precious sons before they were sent off to the front to fight. And this was brought to light just 6 years ago by Miro Shimabukuro of UW Bothell, a book called Relocating Authority. And then your own Nina Wallace at the Densho blog brings us stories about the similar stories of mothers writing letters at Amachi, at Poston, and Topaz. So there are all these, it's like bringing conscience and the Constitution in as a miniseries, a TV miniseries. You know, we did the Hart-Martin Fair Play Committee, but there are these other chapters we could have done, and now finally we have the time with the graphic novel format to do those as well.
And so you talked a little bit about the book. So I'll get to the next question in terms of, so why is it so important to discuss and highlight resistance, especially today?
Well, we're jumping ahead to today, and you know, the resistance in World War II was not unlike our own experience of the last 4 years of Muslim travel bans, family separations, kids in cages. And you know, many here in Seattle protested the anti-immigrant and anti-Black actions of the last administration. This created what became known as the resistance, right? #resist. And I think of my friends in the alphabet resistance over I-5. What this story of resistance shows is that Japanese Americans have a legacy of standing up for their own rights in World War II. We have a legacy of standing up for the rights of redress and reparations in 70s and 80s here in Seattle. And now with the emergencies we saw in the last 4 years, Japanese Americans, I was very pleased to see, stood up once again to be the friends we didn't have when we needed them the most. And I wanted to pay tribute to you, Tom, for your courage in going to, for example, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and putting your body in front of the the authorities who wanted to turn Fort Sill into another family detention camp for asylum seekers from the southern border, very near to a former alien internment camp run by the DOJ in the 1940s. So, having had we didn't ask for this experience of wartime incarceration, right? But having had the experience gives us a certain moral authority to talk about it, as you know, our friends did going to Fort Sill. And that with that moral authority comes a moral responsibility to stand with others who are similarly threatened, whether it's because of their race, their religion, or their immigration status.
Yeah. And just that, again, thank you for the acknowledgement, but also, thank you for bringing the story out, because I think, for whatever reasons, and we kind of know, some of the forces within the community, the story of resistance has not really been highlighted. And I think it's so, what I learned, because I came to this, kind of later in my life, and it was really important for me to understand that, because, for some reason, I think when you don't know the stories of resistance, there's this force to, kind of keep it down. I mean, not to speak out as much, but when you see the rich history of resistance that, this book shows, I think it really emboldens you to even more so. So I really want to thank you and the others for this book. Thank you. I also wanted to mention, of course, your father-in-law himself was a draft resistor from Minidoka, right, whose story I wish we could have gotten into this book too. Mm-hmm. Now, did you want to show these images in terms of? Since we're talking about the resistance today, I just wanted to read in the tradition of Seattle Public Library reading. Just read from the last page of the book. So the last page of the book shows our character Hiroshi Kashiwagi, in the present day, in the recent present, imagining his chagrin at learning there was no law that required him to sign that loyalty questionnaire in camp. He says, all those threats of prison and fines, all lies. I was angry all over again. And he learned this in a copy of Ichi Wegman's Years of Infamy. At least I'm thankful for the opportunity to unburden myself with others who are cast out from our own community, even to this day. To be an American is a privilege I appreciate.
And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that America must unburden itself too. The government was wrong to single us out for exclusion based solely on our race. It was wrong then, and it would be wrong now. And whenever we see America turn against a people because of their race or their religion or their whatever, we won't just stand by. We won't just go along. I will speak up. I will see that every person gets a fair hearing. I will be the friend we didn't have when we needed one the most. It happened to us. We refuse to let it happen again. And that theme, the mantra of not letting it happen again, was something that was almost an intellectual idea in the last 30 years. You know, we always talk about being vigilant and defending our rights. But in the last 4 years, outside of Densho, your office, you hung a banner that said, "Never again is now." And this is so true. And I was very proud of Densho for mobilizing your resources to not just be an historical archive, but to be on the cutting edge of Japanese American activism and really mobilizing the community to stand in defense of others, just as we were more targeted for our race back in 1942.
Great. No, thank you so much, Frank. And as I look at this last, this image up now, and so at the end of the book, you're recognizing you started the book with the FBI breaking into, I think it was Jim Akutsu's house.
Yes.
And so it's kind of like bookend in terms of what happened in the past and what's happening today, which I think is very powerful.
It was a felicitous occurrence when we were writing the ending to show the ICE, so an ICE officer stapling a new exclusion poster to the telephone pole. And it was the echoes, as you say, the rhymes and the echoes were there. It was the invasion of the public state into the privacy of Japanese American homes, vehicles, and businesses.
Great. So so I hope that, the audience, and I want to start with Frank so that they would have a sense in terms of how well grounded the book is in terms of not only the history of resistance. And we have, Frank, who is known as, an expert on this in this area, and especially in resistance. But I want to now pivot to Tomiko Niimura, and because not only is it the past and what we knew, but we actually learned new materials. At least I did when I read the book, which really excited me. And I think a lot of it, has to do with Tomiko. And you're a PhD, American Ethnic Studies, and you're a writer. And but in addition to that, you have this personal connection to this book. In that one of the the key people that you highlighted, Hiroshi Kashiwagi, is your uncle. And I want to ask you, because your uncle was alive when you started writing the book, what was it like to have him know you were working on this project?
Oh, well, I want to welcome my family members. So my cousin Soji, my Auntie Sadako, his wife, and my cousin Hiroshi Kashiwagi also. I really, I'd worked with my uncle on a few of his books. The first two, one was a memoir, Swimming in the American, which I believe is the first memoir of a no-no boy. And as his second book, The Shoebox Plays. So I knew his story pretty well, and we grew close through working on those books together. Frank certainly had questions also for my uncle, and had conversations with him about specific parts of his story. But really what this book did for me was it really kept me so very mindful of the human stakes, that these were human beings making these decisions. So often we see camp history, as you know, Tom, in black and white photos and sepia tones. And to know that I was working with my family's story was really powerful and meaningful for me.
Yeah, great. And what I did was I showed an image of your uncle up here,
Yes.
as a young man in camp. And I showed this because, I just wanted to also show the use of historic photographs as part of the artwork. And here's this image. Yeah, so I wanted to show that.
Great, thank you.
So let's go to the next question I wanted to ask was, yeah, this is something that actually I was really interested in when I first picked up the book. Of the three characters the book highlights, from a historian perspective, not much has been written or known about Mitsuya Endo or Mitzi Endo. So as I read through, I really found myself drinking in every little tidbit about her. And there was one scene in particular where I didn't know about this, where she found out. I always wondered what was her reaction when she found out about the Supreme Court ruling, which to the audience, we're talking as if everyone knows, but her of the four well-known Japanese American cases that went to the Supreme Court during World War II, hers was the only one that was ruled in her favor unanimously, that helped then close the camps and open up the West Coast. But there's a scene in particular where she finds out about the U.S. Supreme Court ruling, and so walk me through kind of the process that you use to learn more about this and bring it to the book. And I'll show some of the the slides that you have of this. So let me come back here and go to the next one. So here's Mitzi Endo, but I'll start with this image. And so go ahead, Tomiko, and just kind of talk us through what this is.
Sure. So following the Densho Encyclopedia and the entry on Mitsuya Endo, I went to find this article in an academic journal. It was published back in 2011. It was really long, and I had to request it through interlibrary loan. It took a while to get to us, but here it was. It was the Nisei Employees versus the California State Personnel Board, a journal of ex parte Endo. And it was basically Endo's case as told from letters and correspondence with her best friend at the time, Janet Sakae, who took a different name after she was married, of course. And she... And so I was reading through the article, it's really long, and I came across this paragraph and loved it so much. And I'll just read it really quickly. When the exclusion order was lifted on December 17th, I knew we'd won our case. And a couple of days later, when Mitsuya Endo, she lives in the next block, came running with a telegram from you, that's her attorney, confirming my belief. We were so happy that we actually danced around the room. It was just a lovely moment. I was so excited to find it.
Okay, so people remember that, and then so here is an image of kind of capturing some of this in terms of her first finding out the news at the Topaz post office. And I'm going to do a brief segue, because not only did you get from these secondary sources this information, but everyone look at these images, especially of the Topaz post office. Like Tomiko, you said earlier, I see things in kind of black and white, and you don't oftentimes see much in color. And what you see here is what Ross, what you did in terms of getting footage from the Dave Tatsuno, this film footage that actually showed the Topaz post office and the coloring and the signage and everything, and how you did that. So I thought that was just so cool that you were able to do that. And we'll talk more about this later, Ross, but I just want to show that the audience, how much work went into the historical accuracy of the book. This wasn't just like made up in people's minds. You guys did a ton of research, which, we come to the next one, and here's an example of a primary source. And Tomiko, talk about this.
Yeah, so the other thing that happened when I was researching Mitsuya Endo's story was I requested a folder of letters between her and her attorney, James Purcell. And again, took a while to get it. I had to guess and make sure it was the right folder that I was requesting from the archives. The Wing Luke requested it from the California State Archives, and 25 pages of correspondence came in, including this telegram from Mitsuye Endo. I'm extremely joyous of results. Appreciate very much your long effort in restoring our rights. And again, I can feel that echoing across that, back to that academic journal article, right? Dancing around the room. And again, you don't see these moments very often. Certainly, I'd never seen anything like it before. And I was very excited to find that. And here, Ross reproduced that telegram and envisioned what it was like to see them dancing in the barrack at Topaz.
Yeah, so so you brought to life, kind of these historical moments that, in many cases I was always wondering about. So again, thank you. And yeah, all these pieces. So I'm going to move on. We might have more time later on for more questions for you, Tomiko, but I want to get to Ross. And Ross, we just showed actually a couple of examples of using historical images to create the artwork. One was the image of Hiroshi Kashiwagi and the image that Matt did, and then the one that you did with the Topaz post office. But the story gets better, and this was I was really kind of geeked out and excited about this because you used a computer-aided design, CAD, to help you create things. And I grabbed a sequence of slides that you provided me that I want you to talk us through in terms of how you created this sort of view of the Puyallup Assembly Center. So go ahead and walk us through this.
Sure. Yeah, I used to be an architect, right? I sometimes still am, but and in my work as an architect, I used a free program called SketchUp, and you can basically take a photograph and establish vanishing lines based on that photograph, and it allows you to construct a 3D model in CAD that you can then basically construct a whole scene. Maybe if you go to the next slide, you'll see sort of this is from a photograph from Puyallup of the camp being built. And then from that, I could start putting in the actual barracks where they actually were, and the bandstand or the grandstand of the park, and start to get a sense of the context of it. And, there wasn't any scene in the book that was this scene, but with the 3D model, I could spin around and put it wherever I wanted, put the camera wherever I wanted to set up just the right view for, a particular scene.
Yeah, so that was the cool thing for me, that you took the time to create these three-dimensional renderings so that you could get these different perspectives, because all we see are these two-dimensional images of a certain perspective. By this work, you could actually see it from a different angle, which could be really helpful. So let's keep going. So tell me what you did here.
Well, this is pretty much the same thing, but I wanted to be sure to get the roller coaster, because I wanted that to be evident in one of the opening scenes when they first arrive at the fairgrounds. And so I have that blocked in just so I could get the right angle and the right perspective to show where they arrive, that it's really clear that are fairgrounds. And I think if there's another slide here, this was an aerial shot of the whole camp at Puyallup. And actually, one thing, kind of a side note, a discovery in this shot was that there are actually guard towers over on the left. You can barely see them, but that was sort of a question that was up in the air. We weren't really sure. We didn't really have photographic evidence that there was guard towers at the Puyallup at the time. And I wanted that as a transition from Seattle to Puyallup, where they're on the bus, you see kind of the towers of Seattle as they leave from the bus. And then when they arrive at Puyallup, you see the towers, the guard towers kind of taking their place. And, but it wasn't clear that there were towers, but I don't know if you'll be able to identify them, but sort of in the center of those two blocks of barracks on the upper and lower, there's a little guard tower on each one.
Hmm.
Um,
And that's
but-
very cool too, Ross, because as much as I've studied Puyallup, I've heard lots of stories of people talking about the guard towers and the lights coming from them. And so in some ways I had always kind of pictured what they'd look like. But then when we were talking last week, I realized I don't think I've ever seen a picture of a guard tower at Puyallup. And it took me aback. And for you to talk about this was really interesting to me.
Yeah. So that was, this whole process was just various discoveries, that it was like just detective work, both on the part of the writers, especially on the part of the writers, but it was fun finding, photographic detective work as well. And
so actually here you can actually see where the guard towers are better in terms of.
Yeah. Right. And so then for scenes, then it was all set up, and then there were quite a few scenes in Puyallup. And so, so I could just, then it was easy at that point to set up, at the cafeteria where they were out in the rain. You could see that scene very easily, set it up with all the right things.
And so all that work you did, starting from those, the earlier slides to get through here, essentially allows you to do this, right? This is kind of where all that work went to, which, again, just amazing. I'm in awe that you did that much work to make sure that you got this right.
Yeah, I wanted the angle from this side because I knew the buses were going to be coming down that center road, and I wanted it, and I knew they arrived at that spot. That was the other thing, was just to get my head around the sequencing of where things were and where they arrived. And I just needed to know all that in my head just to feel comfortable with telling the story. And so this way I could get, there isn't a photograph that shows this. So it was good to be able to kind of recreate that scene from that perspective. So.
Okay. And, just briefly, this was just one example. Was there another example of using kind of this 3D rendering, CAD work for a scene or drawing that you had to do?
Yeah, well, the one that comes to mind is the cover. It's you can't see it there. It's that was the shoe shop that the Akutsus had before the war. There was no photographs of it. Seattle has old, in the 30s, they had, there was a WPA project to take pictures of every building in Seattle, but for some reason that block just was not photographed, or nothing has survived for that block. And so it was a real challenge. But then, thanks to Densho Digital Repository, I found this picture of the shoe shop block from the corner. And it was the shoe shop. There was clearly, the sign was clearly their shoe shop. And I had no idea what the sign was going to look like. And so it was it's this great boot that of the period that just thought it really kind of was a little detail that really hammered it home, that the time and everything. But the 3D CAD allowed me to sort of tweak the imagery, because I really wanted Harborview to be in the background of that scene. So because Harborview plays an important role in the story, and it sort of ties the family. It's related to the family, and so it was the CAD allowed me to get all the pieces just where I wanted them for that cover. So that's probably the best example I can think of for CAD doing its work.
Yeah. So I want to comment on that. Before I do, I just want to remind the audience that the next section is going to be Q&A. So if you have a question for the panelists, you go ahead and type it in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But yeah, I just want to make a comment, Ross, as you were talking, when we first started Densho, 25 years ago, and we started, collecting the stories and recording them, videoing them, scanning or digitizing historic photographs. I remember talking, with the staff, and we are talking about how, as we did this, we would say, we don't know how people in the future are going to use these materials, and we probably won't even imagine some of the things. And as you were talking about taking these, two-dimensional historic photographs and creating these three-dimensional renderings, and then able to get different perspectives, I don't think I was thinking that, 25 years ago. That's very, very cool. So thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah.
So let's go to the Q&A, and there's one from Kimberly, which is, I think, for all three of you. It's, what was the collaborative process like for the three of you when it came to conceptualizing the imagery for illustrating this meaningful yet harrowing book? So how did you guys, think about that?
That's a
How
tough
did you
question
talk about it?
because we took a year just to understand, Tomiko and I, how to write a graphic novel. And so there was a lot to understand about graphic novels as pictorial images, juxtaposed pictorial images in a deliberate sequence. And we wrote outlines that the artists immediately grabbed and started drawing from, right, Ross? And then once we started doing that, we had to catch up to them and write the dialogue and correct some of the pictures and write the dialogue around what they were drawing. So it was an iterative process back and forth of each of us catching up to the other.
It was definitely a dialogue between art and writing. Pretty much every step of the way. There was the initial script, and then that inspired initial drawings, and then pushback, for the next 3 years, back and forth.
On both sides, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious. So, I know the Wing Luke got funding from the National Park Service, JAX program, which in general, those are 2-year projects. I'm curious. So did this project take longer than you? Did I hit a sore spot?
We had deadline extensions. We had some deadline extensions.
I mean, the Wing Luke gave us an unrealistic deadline of 1 year to do the project.
Oh my! Yeah, I was going to ask about this collaborative process, and it sounds like it's iterative, but it took 4 years, and you're supposed to do this 1 year.
In 1 year, yeah. So we didn't come in with a completed script, within a month to give to the artists and for them to draw. We had to really develop the story, develop the characters, and then understand the vision for this book, which is that it would have been tempting to do a book by committee, right? And have, well, you write this chapter, I'll write this chapter, and then we'll kind of mush it together at the end. And I'll admit I set a challenge to us, which was, rather than do 3 characters stop and start, Jim is home, he goes to camp, he gets out of camp and goes to prison, and then comes home. And Mitsuya Endo is at home, she goes to camp, she gets out of camp and comes home. We would tell the story in one continuous timeline. So this is an epic narrative of incarceration told through 3 characters whose stories are interwoven along one continuous timeline, so that the reader can experience the 4 years of camp and 6 months of resettlement afterwards, and have a sense of that time just as the characters experienced it. And that lends a lot of what people are calling the book being kind of a page turner, because it has that kind of narrative drive. The other part is the 4th character. The 4th character in this book is the government and their partners in the Japanese American Citizens League. And in order to have characters who are resistors, right, you need to understand what they're resisting against. So we show you the government officials, mid-level managers, not especially the best and the brightest, who are creating these eviction orders, managing these camps, administering these camps, in cooperation with Japanese American leaders who are urging cooperation, trying to find a way to make this thing work, make these camps work for the betterment of all. So that is something that that is not often seen in books like this.
Yeah. So I'm gonna move on because this is a question for you, Tomiko, and it comes from Beth Takakawa, which I'll mention is who is the CEO of the Wing Luke and
Retiring.
And is retiring. Yeah, I was going to
Yes.
congratulate Beth
Thank you,
and
Beth.
wish her well, and thanks for the question. But her question for you, Tomiko, is how did your own family story inform your role in this project?
Well, all of us have connections to family in camp, right? My dad and his family were incarcerated at Thule. Frank has family members who were, I believe, at Heart Mountain.
Yeah.
Ross had family members at Amache, right? And Matt had also family members incarcerated as well. So it wasn't just me, but particularly because this was my uncle's story as one of the stories that we highlighted. I felt certainly a great sense of responsibility and a really great desire to honor the stories and his courageous resistance, which I know affected him for a very long time, even into well into his 90s. So certainly we all had that connection to the camp history, but I certainly had a different sense of having him as a highlighted character. Thank you,
Great.
Beth.
No, thank you. This one I'm going to direct to Ross. It's from David, and Ross, it feels like you have the most experience with graphic novels. And the question from David is, why did you decide on doing this book as a graphic novel? And was it primarily to attract a younger audience? I would broaden that question in terms of, why do a graphic novel?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, well, the graphic novel format was decided before any of us were even brought on board. But it is certainly has become kind of a huge part of history and curriculums for schools and school age kids. I think it's just a really great way to deliver stories in a vivid way that you can experience on all levels. Just not just the writing, but visually as well, and get into the emotions of the characters in ways that the written page. Apologies to the authors in the room. A picture's worth 1,000 words sometimes. So I think it's just a very accessible medium, I think.
Great. No, thank you. So there's a question that I'm scanning just the questions, and there's one, and I'm going to direct this to Frank. It's a type of question that or discussion I would have with you kind of at the by the coffee place at Densho, and it's talking about how much of the dialogue for the JACL leaders came directly from where do they come from? I mean, where there was some fiery stuff in there. Where did that come from?
I knew this would come up. I knew that'd be because this is new material for a lot of people. I took very great care to draw all of their words directly from their mouths. Mike Masaoka's statements about swearing our loyalty to America, saluting the flag, is from an Associated Press story, where he gave these quotes saying that we're willing to waive our rights to protest in order to show our loyalty and be good Americans. And some of General DeWitt's inflammatory comments about not trusting the Japanese, even though they claim to be helpful, is taken from a telephone transcript that Roger Daniels published in one of his books that was preserved in the National Archives. So every scene on every page, whether it's JACL and the government or Akutsu, Kashiwagi, and Endo, is drawn very carefully from the historical record. From their own words, and where we don't have access to private conversations, the dialogue is drawn, is true to their character and true to the situation at that moment, based on, again, the historical record that we have. So thanks for that question. Yeah.
And I really want the audience to get that this is kind of an extraordinary thing. I mean, when I think of a graphic novel and when I first started reading, I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. But the amount of information packed in there, and as you said earlier, the care you took to create a timeline. I mean, you shared, I can't remember if it was last week or over the weekend, a timeline that you're working on, for an educational guide. I mean, you're able to do that because you guys spent so much time researching this and doing this. And
Yeah.
yes, I know why it took 4 years, let alone the artwork. I mean, just the amount
But
of research.
Don't be too modest, Tommy Keta, because a lot of the links in my interactive timeline are links to Densho Encyclopedia articles. And so it's a collaboration back and forth. Sid Zaima has this question: how are you getting young kids interested in this time in history? Are you pursuing school systems and books into reading curriculum? And the answer is yes. The Wing Luke, as part of the grant, insisted we have an educator's guide, which would be posted online at curriculum.wingluke.org within about a month. They'll be ready. And with that, there'll be lesson plans for teachers aligned to Washington State teaching standards, but also, and California too, but also an online interactive historical timeline using this Tiki-Taki software that literally is a timeline, and you can click on it and pop up bubbles with the scenes from every page and see the Mike Masaoka press conference, for example, where he talks about being loyal to the flag, or General DeWitt's telephone transcript of not trusting the Japanese even though they claim to be loyal. So it is carefully aligned to the book, and I was pleased that in some of the comments, the reader comments, I've seen that people feel that this book serves not just as a text about resistance, but as an overview of the incarceration experience itself. And that alone, I was very pleased to see that, because again, it does capture the epic nature of this experience.
No, I would agree. So here's a question from Joaquin that kind of strikes a chord with me. Why do you believe the Mitsuya Endo story was so overlooked? I mean, I had this conversation with with Sarah, my wife, this morning, as she was asking, so who are the characters and why do we know about Min Yasui, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Fred Korematsu, and not Mitsuya Endo? Tomiko, I'm going to have you start with that one. I mean, why do you think we know about those 3 men and not so much about Mitsuya Endo?
I think there are a lot of reasons. Part of it is that, she was very private. She really didn't talk about her case very much, even to her kids. She also, she won. And so her cases were not revived in our consciousness with the Coram Nobis cases, right? The other 3 men. Frank has pointed out that her kids didn't necessarily advocate for her memory in the same way, right, that Karen Korematsu and Hale Yasui, right, have, or the Hirabayashi family. And I think also, she didn't testify also during redress. So again, another chance to kind of re-enter our historical narrative and consciousness. So there are lots of reasons, I think, why people don't know. But I'm also, when people say, well, she won, so we don't know. We don't know about her as much. But I also, and I think all of us felt kind of strongly that because she won, that's all the more reason, right, for us to remember her and celebrate her case and really honor also the courage of her attorney, James Purcell, who took her case all the way to the Supreme Court with 10 kids at home and very little pay.
Yeah, no, good answer. Yeah, Ross, question for you. When I read the graphic novel, 2 different illustrators, which was unusual to me to see that. And I was just curious in terms of, graphic novels, is that something that was common to have two different illustrators? And what kind of problems or challenges was it to have two different illustrators for one book?
Well, I think it is a challenge, and that was again, that was how we were hired, and that was the mandate we had. And I think it was tricky at the beginning because we were trying to figure out how the book would be structured with two different art styles, very different art styles. And what we came upon was if we could break the story up. I mean, the timeline sequencing of the stories where everything is happening, you know, we're jumping from story to story back and forth. I think in a way it's an advantage to have a very distinctive style between the two stories, just so it helps orient the reader. Oh, we're back in this story now, or we're coming back out. And actually Dan Schaefer of Chin Music Press enhanced that with coloring of the pages, the borders of the pages. So
Did a fantastic job.
Yeah, they did a wonderful job. So then it was I think Matt's art is very kind of visceral and emotional, and I think that lent itself really well to the Tule Lake story, because just everything that was going on, and so I think the two stories that I worked on it was a little more sort of one-on-one kind of character dialogues that I felt comfortable with, and so I think it was a challenge at the beginning, just figuring out how we were going to do it. But once we figured out how we were going to do it, I think it flowed pretty easily. So.
Great.
Tom, when you look at the book, take a look at the storytelling style. I mean, Ross's stories are very dramatic, like movie-like scenes, like a film storyboard. Matt's drawings are static. They're more like single panel. And so it was very late we realized that we had to do a different storytelling approach to the Tule Lake story, to the Kashiwagi story. Mm-hmm. So there is more narration. Hiroshi Kashiwagi is doing more thinking inside his head and telling us the story as he sees it at Tule Lake through the narration. And that's what carries that story. And so the narration carried throughout the novel drives the story forward and kind of brings those two styles of art together.
Great. And so this next one, Frank, this was, it's almost like a relative price, wrote this one for you. It's from Alex Foster, but the question is, I'm reading No-No Boy now and would love to hear more about Jim Makutsu, who I understand was a model for the resistor in the novel. And we haven't talked very much about Jim. So briefly talk about, Jim and his role and his connection to the novel No-No Boy.
Jim Makutsu of Seattle was a UW student, tried to enlist before and after Pearl Harbor, but rejected for flat feet. His father is separated from their family by the FBI, sent to a Justice Department internment camp in Montana. His family loses the home that they own on First Hill and their shoe repair business in Seattle's Chinatown after investing in new machinery. So Jim's upset with how JCL collaborates with the government in camp. Then after 2 years of this in camp, he's given a draft notice. And he says, no, I've had enough. I'll see you in court. I didn't get due process and a fair hearing before I was kicked out of Seattle and sent here to this camp in Minidoka. I want my day in court. And that is, his story. He was convicted in what Eric Muller and Minya Sui described also as a kangaroo court trial in federal district court in Boise. And he spends 2 years at the federal penitentiary at McNeil Island, Washington, takes a bus back to Seattle. And if you look at the last chapter of the book, when Jim comes back to Seattle, you're suddenly into the plot of John Okada's No-No Boy, because Jim was the inspiration for Ichiro Yamada in No-No Boy. And this was a wonderful opportunity to turn the novel No-No Boy inside out and just kind of show you the real life events that Okada transformed into his fiction of No-No Boy, including the tragic ending for Jim's mother that Ichiro's mother also has, but in a different way. So the emotional arc of our story mirrors the emotional arc of Okada's Nono Boy, because they kind of land at the same tragedy, which I won't get into.
And just a quick side note about Jim and his brother Gene. I grew up on Beacon Hill, and actually was a neighbor of both of them, and so I knew both of the men growing up. And Jim was this very kind, generous man in the neighborhood, and did a lot with the kids in the neighborhood, as well as Gene. So I grew up with the kids, and so it's interesting how these individuals are much greater than what we even know from a historical standpoint, because they're full individuals with lives and other areas. And I just wanted to mention that. The last question, we're past 7 already, and it's come up a couple of times, and people are interested in, I think people are excited about, We Hereby Refuse, and they're asking about the other graphic novels. I think at the beginning they talked about this was one of a part of a series. What are the plans for the other graphic novels?
There's a series of 3 that Cassie Chin at the Wing Museum envisioned. The first one was Matsuzaki and Larry Matsuda's Fighting for America, the Bakumise soldiers. Second was Camp Resistance. The third coming up will be one by Ken Mochizuki and Kiku Hughes. I think it's called Allies, but it'll be about Hakujin allies, white allies of the folks in here in Seattle.
Great. Well, I think we have time for one more question, and maybe this is for any of you. I asked the question earlier of each of you, what delight did you have? And you told each of you about a brief anecdote, which I really love. But what has surprised you as a result of completing this project? Is there something that, and each of you can answer if you like, but was there one thing that you can share that you weren't expecting from doing this project? I mean, think about at the beginning when you first started, it sounds like over 4 years ago, and now you're at the part where it's high acclaim, people are excited, it's selling much better than I think people expected. Yeah. What surprised you about this?
You guys?
So Ross,
I guess on a sour note, what surprised me, maybe not, was the relevance of it. That when we started this project, we started it in the winter of 2017, so there was some foreshadowing. But how much parallel from this story to today, it was just that was kind of a harrowing surprise for me. So.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Tamiko, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that resistance was more widespread than I thought. Certainly Frank's movie and other movies like Rabbit in the Moon have documented the stories of resistance. But I have come to believe, working on this book, that the story of camp is incomplete without the stories of resistance. And that surprised me.
That's good. And Frank, I'll let you have the last word. So
I echo Ross in that when we started out, we had Hiroshi's last line as saying, should America ever turn again against its own people because of their race, religion, or immigration status? And we had to change that line because it wasn't just a question of if, but it's happening again. Right. So that was history catching up to this story, regrettably. And the book having, as we were writing over the last 4 years, just all the resonance of how 1942 was echoed in 2020. So 2019, never again is now, as you said.
Great. No, thank you. And thank you, the 3. I'm going to call back. I think Stesha, are you going to come back and close the show? But I just want to thank the 3 of you. This, it really did work in terms of, I felt like this was a conversation. This was really enjoyable for me. And I know I think we had at one point close to 400 people following us
Oh my gosh.
as we talked.
Thank
So
you, Tom.
Yeah.
This was,
Thank you, Tom.
It was really great.
And thank you, Stacia.
Oh,
I said
thanks
thank you,
so
Stacia.
much. Oh, thank you. Thanks to all of you. This was such a wonderful conversation. And I feel like we could keep going because there's so many questions in the Q&A and chat. So we'll just, hopefully people will take the opportunity to take a look at the book and learn more about that. And then we look forward to the others in the series as well. I wanted to let folks know that they can order copies of We Hereby Refuse from our friends over at Elliott Bay Book Company. The store is open for limited browsing, curbside pickup, and delivery. And you can order the book at their website, elliottbaybook.com. And you can, of course, find We Hereby Refuse at the library as well. And that website is spl.org. And I know that this book is also a peak pick at the library as well. So
I wanted to thank you for that, Stacia.
Oh, yeah.
That's just so thrilling, right?
It is. It's
To be in
exciting.
the same company as Viet Thanh Nguyen and all the other
Oh,
best-selling
yeah.
authors on the Peak Pick shelf is a real honor. Stacia, I also want to take a point of personal privilege and thank the librarians at the Beacon Hill branch of SPL for letting me set up shop in one of the carols there in the summer and fall of 2019 to be working on this book. So thank you, folks, at librarians.
Oh,
Librarians
well,
are the
thanks.
greatest.
Yeah, thanks to Tina and all the wonderful folks at Beacon Hill branch. And actually, I can just take a minute to mention that I know that some of the branches are starting to reopen as well. So on the library's website, spl.org, we have a link to the Road to Reopening, which gives the details so you can actually take a minute to see if your local branch is going to be opening for curbside or limited browsing, that kind of thing. It's a gradual process,
Yeah.
but yeah, eventually we'll get there. Yeah. We're so grateful to everybody who made tonight's program possible. Thank you to our program partners, Densho and Tom. Thank you, as always, for doing such a great job as you disappear from the screen. We're so grateful for your help tonight. Thanks to the Wing Luke Museum and Diane for introducing and explaining the project. And of course, our good friends over at Elliott Bay Book Company. We're so grateful to them for being our ongoing stalwart companions in this book life. Thanks so much to our sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. We're so grateful that you were here. I did want to mention that we are going to save the chat from tonight's program, and Karen at Elliott Bay has offered to send that out to everybody who registered for tonight's event, because there were so many links and good comments and things flying through the chat. And so we want to make sure everybody has access to that. So Karen is going to send that out after. With that, thanks to you three. Thanks so much, Tom, Diane, and Karen. And thanks to all of you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stacia.
Thank you.
Thank you.